welcome to the first ever virtual NMLS Ombudsman Meeting. So glad to be with you today virtually. The world has changed so much in the past 6 months, and our last Ombudsman meeting during the 2020 NMLS conference, there were over 700 people in attendance, and I can't even imagine that right now today. And so when we started planning this Ombudsman meeting, we knew we had to change the format. We couldn't all be in the same room to talk about the issues that we needed to talk about, and I'll talk about that a little bit later in today's meeting. But when we went out to request topics, it was very clear that everyone really wanted to talk about the same issues: the COVID-19 pandemic and the short-term and long-term changes our community needs to make to work safely and effectively. All of these submitted topics echoed the same challenges that companies and state regulators alike are facing today. So the focus of today's meeting will be remote work and remote supervision in a post-pandemic world. Last week, I gathered a group of 8 industry and state regulatory experts to have a frank discussion on these issues. And the discussion included Kirsten Anderson, Licensing Manager for the Oregon Department of Consumer and Business Services; Charlie Clark, Director of the Washington Department of Financial Institutions; Rashenda Kelly, Interim Commissioner for the Mississippi Department of Banking and Consumer Finance; Danielle Fagri-Arlo, Senior Vice President of the American Financial Services Association; Charlie Fields, Senior Vice President of Mortgage Regulatory Relations for PennyMac Loan Services; Melissa Kopel, Senior Vice President of Loan Integrity, Loan Depot; and Pete Mills, Senior Vice President of Residential Policy and Member Engagement for the Mortgage Bankers Association. So during today's meeting, we will watch this recording. And as you watch the conversation, please submit questions and comments in the chat feature of WebEx. After the recording is over, the industry and state regulator experts will join us live to continue the conversation. I encourage you to submit comments and questions about the discussion, but I do ask that your submissions remain on the central theme of the meeting. Unfortunately, this Ombudsman meeting will not have an open forum section where other issues may be raised. So please continue to send these other issues to the inbox at ombudsman@nmls.org. So as an overview of what we generally try to do, the NMLS Ombudsman is a resource for NMLS users with the goal of assisting in the resolution of policy and operational issues. The objective of the meeting is to foster constructive dialogue between industry users of NMLS and state regulators to mutually work towards the goal of modern and efficient financial services regulation. Now, some issues brought to the Ombudsman can be resolved rather quickly, while others take months or even years. In addition to topics raised at the Open NMLS Ombudsman meeting at the 2020 NMLS conference, the Ombudsman received 142 emails between February 1 of this year to August 31st, and that represents a 50% increase compared to the previous 6-month period. And the emails are reviewed by the Ombudsman, who either will respond directly or refer questions to SRR staff running the system. Many of the questions are answered from the call center, the NMLS call center, various departments within the NMLS, other state regulators perhaps, or even the CFPB, depending on the nature of the question. Over the last 6 months, the Ombudsman received approximately 20 emails a month on average. The top 5 categories of the last 6 months in order of frequency are number 1, COVID-19, most commonly related to the applicant's ability to take the SAFE MLO test, how to file consumer complaints, licensing requirements, temporary authority related emails, and entitlement issues, rounded that off with password resets and account access. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started and watch the meeting that occurred last week. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for agreeing to join this discussion on a topic that unsurprisingly is on everyone's mind. When we went out for topics for this Ombudsman meeting, it was very clear that most everyone wanted to talk about the same issue, the COVID-19 pandemic and the short-term and long-term changes our community needs to make to continue to work safely and effectively. So today, I wanted to focus on remote work and remote supervision in a post-pandemic world. The COVID-19 pandemic forced us all to rapidly change and move to remote operations. And while it's far from over, it's not too early to discuss what we've learned and from the initial pandemic response and to begin thinking about how location supervision might stay different in a post-pandemic world. Before we get started, I wanted to make sure that everyone has the clear purpose of this meeting, which is the perspective of sharing. The Ombudsman Meeting is a venue for regulators and members of the industry to come together and understand each other better. Many of the things we talk about today will not have final answers or solutions, but we can hope this meeting will be greater conversations on important topics. And so to kick off today's discussion, so the Non-Depository Supervisory Committee, or the NDSC, has a state agency outreach initiative underway, and it's related to working from home. And so, Charlie Clark, if you can give us some more information on that, I'd sure appreciate that.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Well, to start with, on this issue, the NDSC has really been a resource for information, and I'll start with a little background. Back in March, right when folks were looking at stay-home orders, the NDSC took up this issue and was very concerned that all commissioners really needed to know about the need for MLOs to be able to work from unlicensed locations, typically from their home. Many states, including Washington, have since issued orders where they've allowed MLOs to work from home. So back in March, the NDSC had issued a notice to commissioners. And since then, the NDSC has closely followed this issue, and we've become aware that, the guidance across the country is somewhat varied. There are varying expiration dates. This has been a concern raised by several of the associations that we work with. So thank you for raising your concerns and expressing your need that there be an extension of the work from home type guidance. So in response, the NDSC recently issued a notice to all commissioners again, and we set forth kind of some basic points that we had arrived at. The main thing was that the authority to act really lies with the individual states. And the NDSC is concerned about public welfare and the employees of the companies that we license. We're concerned about the potential for companies being put in a difficult position of perhaps worried about complying with state law, while at the same time worried about keeping their employees safe. And so we've conveyed that information to commissioners around the country, and we'll come up with a few suggestions. One has been, we've recommended that if states have issued guidance, that they look at the expiration on that guidance and think about extending it out a ways. Washington, my home state, we've extended it through the end of the year, and we'll probably reconsider that date as the expiration gets closer. So if for states that have not issued guidance, the NDSC asks commissioners to consider allowing MLOs to work from home or adopting a no-action position if their state law really doesn't allow for that flexibility to just outright allow MLOs to work from home without a branch license. But we also recommended some safeguards that you'll see in much of the guidance that's been issued. Some of the safeguards are that MLOs only access secure origination platforms, that MLOs not keep physical business records at their home or an unlicensed location, and that MLOs not meet with customers at unlicensed locations. I anticipate that the NDSC will continue to closely monitor this issue. The current chair of the NDSC, Illinois Secretary Deborah Hagan, she's the one that issued the recent notice to commissioners, and I anticipate that she'll continue to put that on the NDSC's agenda. Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Charlie. Just in general overview, just quickly of the NDSC, Roshunda, would you just give us kind of a general overview?
Sure, Jim. The NDSC is a permanent CSPS board committee, and they really provide oversight and support for functional committees established by the Nationwide Cooperative Agreement and for the non-depository supervision. They support functional committees such as the MET and the MNC. This committee is also a forum, which is a very important part, for interstate discussion on non-depository supervision, and they provide advice on non-depository matters. The committee is also a liaison between the CSPS board and state associations and federal agencies for the benefit of a coordinated non-depository system. The NDSC, they really drive and work on principles and priorities as we talk about network supervision. That's a general overview of the NDSC.
Thank you, Roshunda. And so just about the initiative that Charlie was discussing, could we just have, what are our industry representatives' reactions to the NDSC's outreach initiative?
Jim, it's Pete. First of all, thank you very much for the update. Charlie, like I said, I think you guys are the first ones to come out with remote work guidance, and the way everybody came together, I think is important. I think, as many of our companies operate in, at least a dozen states, some of them operate in all 50, and we'd all love complete uniformity. I know we can't expect that. Every state has its own processes, but I think it's important to have a uniform framework in which to operate, and then how you guys get it done, whether it's through rules, executive orders, or whatever. You all have to work through your own processes internally in your states, but having that common framework as we go forward, both in the short term through the pandemic, but also longer term as we think about remote work as a really a future state. When we talk to our companies, many of them are talking about, the conversations are happening now about when do we bring people back? How do we bring them back? Do we bring them back by function? Do we bring them back really based on, and we're at a stage now with the virus still very active, it's really driven by personal needs, not by function. So a lot of this, people are rethinking the workplace for the long term. And so having this committee think about it in the same way we're thinking about it, I think will be very helpful as we go forward.
Jim, this is Charlie Fields with PennyMac. I'd add that we really appreciate the coordination amongst the states and also the utilization of the NMLS homepage as a resource to go to when state guidance has been updated. That's been a tremendous help in having a one source to go to for the majority of the guidance. I would encourage the states to continue to update that information as guidance changes and goes forward from here on out. So I really appreciate that coordination. It really makes it easy for everybody to be on the same understanding of the state's expectations as it relates to working from home and the criteria for doing so in a safe and compliant manner.
Thank you, Charlie. Does anybody else have a reaction to the initiative?
This is Melissa from Loan Depot. I'll just second what Pete said in regards to appreciating the focus and the attention so quickly and acknowledging the need for the industry. I think it definitely was a coordinated effort and continues to be one as we move through the pandemic and hope and eventually get to post-pandemic world for all of us to continue, supporting not only our customers but also our employees and their safety.
Thank you, Melissa. All right, well, so I think we can move on to some of the topics that were raised in the submissions and some of the items that we wanted to cover today. We have three main areas, the COVID guidance that we just discussed a little bit, changes that have been made in the organizations and the companies due to the COVID-19, and then also branching requirements and possible reforms on the horizon to discuss. So those three main areas. So looking at the guidance itself, we've covered a little bit of how the industry digested the guidance from the states, and I'm hearing that there's an appreciation for a standard to be set, a uniform place to go and discover what the guidance is, whether it's executive order, letters, advisory opinions, etc., and then possibly regulatory changes in law or rules. So moving forward from that, from the regulator standpoint, Kansas in particular is looking to make our guidance, specifically as it relates to mortgage loan originators, permanent. And we are looking at ways to do that through our authority under the law regarding remote work. And so we're working with that now. As Charlie said, with the state of Washington, we have also gone ahead and extended our current guidance until the end of the year. And really, that gives us more time to work through what a longer-term approach will be as it relates to Kansas business. So we're looking forward to making some headway on that and coming out with something a little bit more permanent without the need for statutory changes. But again, we're also looking forward to the next legislative session and understand that things may be changed at that point. So my question to the other regulators on the panel is, what are your state's long-term plans currently as you look forward past the pandemic?
So this is Kirsten Anderson from Oregon, and our guidance does not have an end date at this point because we don't know when the pandemic's going to end. So we actually intend to let it continue until it's clear that all of our licensees, that they can comply with going back to work, so to speak. But at the same time, we're using this as an opportunity to see exactly what changes allowing people to work from home have made. So we're monitoring complaints to see if we're seeing any additional complaints that seem to be tied to the fact that MLOs aren't in as supervised locations. We're looking to see if we're having any difficulty getting records through our enforcement or through examination processes. At the same time, we're taking a look at our budget because a lot of our fees do come from branches. And so if we make a change to our branch licensing laws, we have to make sure that we don't put ourselves in a budgetary bind as a result of a reduction of the fees we come in. So really, in some respects, COVID has been a unique opportunity for us to do kind of like a test run of what it might be like to allow MLOs to work from home and other staff as well. As I said, we're looking at this. We know that no matter what we do, we will still have a branch license requirement because companies have commercial locations. And if they're going to have a commercial location, that location should have a license. The question is more when it's a non-commercial location. And as Charlie Clark mentioned in the NDSC guidance, we're looking at things like the equipment that's being used to access information. Is that company owned or is it personal? What sort of security do they have on it to ensure that consumers' personal private information remains safe and uncompromised? So there's a lot of issues that we're looking at, but I will definitely say that our attitude towards changes has changed drastically as a result of COVID, which has taught us many lessons about remote working.
So, Jim, in Washington State, we were looking at doing away with branch licensing for homes. Over the past few years, we had been reaching out to our Mortgage Bankers Association and talking about what that would look like. And so it wasn't a real heavy lift for us to issue our guidance. But Pete had mentioned was either the first or one of the first to come out with guidance, and I can't really take all the credit for that. Sure, we kind of had an idea what it would look like if we needed to go there, but in all honesty, it was the first week of March, and I was on a planning call for an ABA CLE panel that was going to meet in Boston. Of course, that was canceled, but one of the panelists, Tisha Whitehall-Wolf, she's an attorney at Mayor Brown, said, "Hey, Charlie, can I call you after the discussion? I've got an emerging issue to raise with you." She raised the MLO work from home issue, and I think we had our guidance issued within about a day. So I just want to thank Keisha, if she ends up listening to this. Thank you for raising the issue early. It could have been a couple weeks before I had got guidance issued if it hadn't been for you. An additional detail, we're looking at agency request legislation to make it permanent, make the guidance permanent this next session. That, of course, has a process, and we work with our governor's office to move that forward. But right now, it's looking pretty good.
Thank you, Charlie.
Okay, I'll share Mississippi's response. We were a little later in declaring a state of emergency, our governor, and a couple of days after he declared state of emergency, which explicitly gives us the authority to excuse or suspend some of the provisions, such as working from home, which is in our statute. We issued that. And with the fluctuations and the unknowns at that time, I did not put an expiration date in that one, so that one is still out there. Mississippi is one of the states where we're not showing good positive trends. We're coming down on the transmissions, but we're still pretty high by comparison to other states, so I don't see that changing this year. And so in response to that, we have also received feedback or inquiries from the industry in 3 provisions in our statute. One is beyond the pandemic, the outlook on the branching requirement, and also the 25-mile, we have a maximum distance that someone can work from a branch license location. And the next one was a working outside of a commercially licensed, commercially zoned area. So we're looking at those 3. So internally, what we're doing, I mean, this is a fact-finding initiative. This is something that was prompted by the pandemic. And, you know, honestly, with state laws, they get dated. We all know that. And so with this, there are lessons we can take from it. So what we're doing is we're having active conversations among our directors and our attorneys. What does this mean? How effectively will things operate or work without this requirement? How can we do this? Another thing that Kirsten mentioned was budgetary constraints, because that will play into some conversations at the state level. I also think that things that at the state level to consider is each state has a legislative session, and everybody have their own temperaments. But I do think a lot of these states the legislative bodies are in a crisis mode at this point. So having a receptive audience might be a bit of a challenge, but I don't think it's impossible. But I do think this is a good place to start the conversation, because I don't think these are unreasonable requests once we start talking about them. So this is a great platform to do that.
Thank you, Rashonda. Thanks for everybody's comments. So moving on to some changes that have been made during the pandemic. This one's for our industry members here on the panel. Just a summary of how has your operation changed, and how have you been able to operate safely and effectively and in compliance during this period?
If I could jump in, this is Danielle from AFSA. One thing I wanted to point out just at the outset here is I've heard a lot of talk about mortgage, and we certainly represent the mortgage lending and servicing industry, but we also represent a lot of other state licensees, including the vehicle finance industry and the traditional installment lending industry and other sales finance companies who are licensed in some states. Sometimes the state guidance gets a little confusing for us because there'll be a clear answer on mortgage in a state where we're not sure what the answer is for some of those other entities. And that's why we reached out in writing to virtually every state in the country, and I appreciate the responsiveness of the states on the call and the other states who have responded so far, and look forward to the rest of the responses. But one thing so we believe, to the point that was made about that Rashonda made about items or laws getting dated, we believe that state regulators should, to the greatest extent possible, extend work from home waivers and allow work from home to as many licensees as possible for as many roles as possible forever. And it's really been driven by necessity, but now that these investments have been made to work from home, we think it's appropriate, as long as standards are met that are, reasonable standards are met, that we should be able to continue to, loan service, make credit decisions, fund, and other operations and collections, do all those things from a virtual workspace. To your question about what has been done, our members have invested in, virtual private networks, remote workspaces that are identical for a customer, whether someone's in a commercial space or in their home, making calls, receiving calls, and doing other kinds of operations that affect consumers. They're not printing paper about consumers in their homes. They're not keeping customer records in their homes, and they're not meeting with people outside of a commercial space. But it's just a reflection of what modern times we're becoming, and maybe a jump forward based on necessity, even a decade or more into what could be is here now.
Thanks, Danielle. What about from our other industry representatives, the changes that you've made and some of lessons learned, and how the compliance challenges have gone for you or the companies you represent?
I'll go. Do you mind, Charlie? I'll go first, Charlie. You're speaking up. It's Melissa from Loan Depot. So I think it's a good question, Jim. In reflection of this question, it's really not necessarily new things that we've added. It's a ramping up of what we currently already had. So, for instance, we, just like Kirsten uses Citrix, I think, from the state of Oregon, so does Loan Depot. So using, a Citrix environment, the VPN environment, some of us executives already had access to that just to be able, because, we don't have to work from a licensed location. We're not originating, but being able to work, from home and really just ramping that up. And what that meant for Loan Depot was, buying 6,000 additional Citrix licenses, right, to make sure that all of the operations could then go and work remotely. I think I tell people a lot, it's good this didn't happen 5-7 years ago. I think we would have all been in a different situation. But given the fact that most of us are 100% digital and we're leading into this, really just led the path to being able to make the transition pretty seamlessly. We have secure portals that our consumers work through before the pandemic, continue to do so. We do call recording and monitoring. That's something that we've done for years, and we have just ramped that up more. So on that same theme of just increasing. So we're able to keep our pulse on how is the interaction, are the loan officers and our processors, other, origination functions, are we supporting the customer, responding appropriately, timely? We can watch the email traffic. We also have safety reports. So all the metrics that we have within our LOS systems, we're able to really follow the loan along the timeline, right? Making sure, it's in sales, now it goes to processing, appraisals being ordered, notaries being set up, everything like that. You have certain safety reports to make sure that our loans continue to go through and also meet all the applicable compliance deadlines that go with it. I think, too, Kirsten mentioned it, and I agree, too, with the complaints. So really, complaints are 25% in my mind of a CMS, right? It's one of the 4 pillars of a strong CMS, and it gives you that frontline insight into what's occurring right here and now with our customers. So whether that's on the origination side or also our servicing side, which has been impacted quite a bit for, the stats that Pete gave earlier in the call. So really focusing on whether it's a regulatory complaint or just what I like to call organic complaints. So coming through emails, all the multiple surveys that we give. Loan Depot gives upwards of 7 surveys up and through the time a loan is funded to be able to make sure that the customer is satisfied, that they're getting the service that they that we expect and they deserve. So I think it's a question, Jim, of not necessarily, new things, but for us, it was mostly a ramping up. I think what we've changed is, though, another change that I think we would be remiss if we didn't mention is, I think, as a country, is the change in how people are viewing work and where they live. So there is a migration, and I think you all have even seen it within your own organizations, whether state or on industry, is that now people see opportunity to be able to move, to be able to go and afford to buy a home. They want more space. I know that, my husband works with a lot of people up in San Jose, San Francisco, and a lot of his colleagues are moving because they can now afford and they're able to work from home. And so it may not be your LO that, them being tied to a licensed location, but their significant other being able to now work from home and be able to take their family or, just move out of the space that they're in that is so costly for them. So I think that's another change is from a culture perspective of just the country as a whole, of looking from the fact that working from home, it's not just a mortgage industry topic, it's a topic across all the industries. And something that everyone is is having to address. And I think as an industry, we need to embrace, which we're doing today, which I'm very appreciative of.
Thank you, Melissa. Go ahead, Charlie.
Jim, I'd add on to what Melissa just mentioned. 2 changes that I could think of is our change management process. We have a well-developed change management process. However, the volume increased extremely in a very short amount of time. So we had to refine our process in handling that volume to ensure that we addressed all of the changes that have come about. And this process seems to go in waves. So we have the initial on-site of trying to get everybody working from home, and then the states requesting information initially as to how we're revising our process, and then the forbearance where you have some time people are unemployed and how the forbearance process is going with people not being able to make their payments. So it seems to have come in waves with various requirements or challenges at each component. And also the other is ramping up staff in our servicing area to handle the additional calls, consumers concerned about making their payments and forbearance plans and things like that. But also the fact that we are in a great interest rate environment, and individuals, borrowers are looking to take advantage of that as far as refis or purchasing their home. So we've increased staff on the retail side as well. So the increase in staff both on the retail and sales side has been a part of it, making sure we have good quality and candidates and employees joining our staff to handle those consumer needs.
Thank you, Charlie.
Jim, all I would add, I think the COVID situation has really sort of put the spotlight on the distinction between where work gets done and where you meet your customers, and they're not the same. And I think that model was already under challenge with the consumer direct model. I'm thinking Loan Depot, Rocket, and the others. And that change was already underway. It challenged the sort of traditional branch-based retail model, which I think a lot of the state laws are written around that model. And we were already in that process of changing over. I think this sort of giant sandbox that we have with COVID is only accelerating that process. And I appreciate that we're talking not about whether we should accommodate this change, but how to do it. And I really appreciate the fact that we're coming to it from that perspective. There's all different business models, and I think they're all what make our mortgage market a healthy market, a strong market. But I do think this process is already underway, and I think the COVID crisis has just really accelerated how we think about it.
I would add to Pete, this is Danielle. In addition to the mortgage lending industry, the traditional installment lending industry, there are business models where it's only appropriate to be in a branch, and we get that. But those business models, aren't necessarily what we're talking about here. And to have as much flexibility for as many different business models as possible in as many different regulated financial institution industries as possible, I think is where you get the most competition, which is ultimately the best for consumers. Also, to a point that Melissa made about regional diversity, I think that remote work also creates opportunities for differently abled employees who maybe have trouble commuting, and geographically diverse employees who can't reasonably travel to a central commercial office on a daily basis. So it's the expense of the big city, but also just the type of people that you can hire and creating opportunities to have the best workforce possible.
Thank you. That's a great point. And on that point, we've also taken that into consideration with some open positions that we currently have. If allowed to fill at the state agencies, we definitely have a wider range to choose from. We're a little bit hesitant to fill, not knowing how our remote work will look in the future, but we're definitely looking towards that future and understanding what it might look like, as some other states have done, to hire folks that work from their home permanently and get at that wider, diverse workforce, and maybe even, as you said, Danielle, mitigate some of those challenges that people have that they can't move or they can't commute that far, and all kinds of things. So it's definitely something to keep an eye on, and to recognize that. Both on regulatory and industry side, it's something that there are some positives to all of this change. Well, that was a good discussion. Thanks for everyone's comments about that. I do have just a couple of follow-ups before we move on to the branching discussion. So some of the comment letters, particularly from with you, Danielle, with APSA, and then with Pete with the MBA as well, have talked about successes that you've had in remote work, and how you really some of the comments have been you've proven that you can do it successfully remotely to stay compliant and keep that market moving. So if you could just comment on some of those efforts that you've made, and how you measure that success in terms of both safety, compliance, and what your goals are as a business?
I would say that the proof is in the pudding, at least during the pandemic, and we have not seen any complaints from our members. I mean, our members have not seen any consumer complaints related to their new workplace reality. And I think it's because they are, from a consumer perspective, if you're not in a branch model where you're going into the office, if you have a different type of business model, the consumer has the identical experience. And so there's nothing, it's hard to prove a negative, but there's nothing different that they're experiencing to complain about. And then from a regulatory perspective, I had a conversation with a state regulator early on who pointed out that in their state, they are able to show up at a branch and on demand, see anything and do an examination. And it's our perspective that should continue to the extent that a state law would allow that, or a state law provides for examination and supervision. We're not talking about reducing our licensing costs. We're not talking about, hiding anything. Everything is centrally located. Every customer information is on a VPN that can be accessed through a commercial location. It's not at someone's home. So we don't think that there should be a difference in supervision. Realistically speaking, and if people are still using paper, that might be a legitimate business model for sure, but that's not the type of business model we're talking about, asking to work from home.
Yeah, and I think I'd add, I'm going to ask Melissa to jump in on maybe some more specifics, but look, again, I think COVID is this giant sandbox, and we've had 6 months of experience now, and I think remote work has proven itself, certainly from an operational standpoint, in our ability to meet our consumers' needs. At the end of the day, if you're doing that, your complaint levels are going to be lower, and quality of service is going to be higher. I think the challenge now is to, again, sit down with the regulators and say, okay, now what are the controls we need to have in place to make sure this is a long-term viable approach? And I think it's interesting that we've all sort of echoed some of the same themes around, you don't have the public meeting your MLOs in the MLO's living room. And we're all on the same page there. I think there are some best practices that some of the companies like loanDepot that we'll need to look at and sort of build guidance for remote work for the long term around those best practices. And so I guess let's not throw out this big sandbox experience. Let's learn from it and build some industry guidance around it so that it's a long-term solution for the industry.
No, completely agree, Pete. And I think that given, like you said, loanDepot being more or less 100% digital and online and accessible that way, and that the change in our consumers, and that not necessarily as many consumers want to meet face-to-face anymore. I don't know about anyone else, but text me, don't call me, right? It's the generational changes that we're also experiencing, and then also the technology that we're able to put forth, whether it's, dual authentication, and because now everyone has cell phones, so now we can do it that way, or doing the tokens, right? There's lots of different IT stuff that our team has put in together through our InfoSec to really maintain our customers, the security of their information. I'm a paper person. I don't know about anybody else, but I love my paper. But if you were to go to my office, you'd see that I have paper, and I was just joking with someone that it's funny because I haven't missed any of that paper. I haven't had to go to any of it now that I'm home, and I have just one notebook. I don't have a printer. I don't need those things because it's all on my, my system. So, it's definitely a change. I still, like to write my notes. But it's not the loan files that I used to stand in front of a copy machine, for hours on end so I could deliver them to Kirsten and her examination team. Now we're able to use, the state examination system that the CSBS has been able to put together, or to even use like ShareFile or things like that. And we've only heard positive feedback from all the examiners that we've continued to interact with how seamless, and actually they're surprised at how great it's been, even on their end of it, from being able to, Kirsten's point, be able to get records timely and securely.
Yes, thank you. So that kind of moves us into the branching discussion. So before we wrap up, I wanted just to go over a few of the items that have been on people's minds. And let's go back to the regulators now. Putting aside any mandate under state law, what are the regulators' concerns about monitoring and requiring separate licensing of physical locations currently, and just at a fundamental level, and regarding that? So concerns about monitoring or requiring those physical locations being licensed.
So, Jim, this is Henry. I can start. I guess just looking historically at our exam work and enforcement cases that have arisen out of that work, some of the violations would not have been caught but for examiners being on site and having access to look at cutting and pasting and that sort of thing. And we've had people that have been convicted criminally when the case was referred out and they were convicted. Those are pretty few and far between. And so I guess I would always like the ability that if they're handling physical business records at a location, that we have access to those physical records. But I think some of the concepts thrown out there are very good, where everything's on a secure platform, no physical records at the home location or other location. And so I'm very open to I kind of like the concept of relaxing the branch license requirement. I also think about things like the safety of my examiners. If they're going into people's homes, I'm just not real crazy about that. When I look at the NMLS perspective, I'm not real crazy about going into their home from their perspective. When you think about privacy rights and things like that, and examiners potentially stepping over the line, and I hope that examiners would be well trained and able to deal with that. But as the leader of an agency, I worry about those type of things. So those are my initial thoughts on this. Kristen, I know you have some thoughts too.
Well, Charlie, you mentioned a few of them. And the thing I am worried a little bit about are some of the things that we used to catch going physically into people's offices. The hearing an LO on the phone saying things to a customer and going, wait a second, that's not okay. We miss some of that when we aren't physically going into locations and checking it. It also seemed that many locations had their own feel to them. In some of these larger companies where you could almost pinpoint the branch that seemed to be having the most problems, and you could then address that branch and really bring the overall compliance of the company up quite a bit by addressing the culture that was coming out of that group of people who were doing the origination. I think always worry a little bit about the rogue MLOs, and if you have them working from their office in their home where maybe you don't see them quite as much, how are you controlling what they're doing? I'm from the old days where, we did cases where the MLO would say to the consumer, you need to give me $500, and the consumer would hand them $500, and that never made it anywhere into the system. So I still have visions of some of the old school tricks that some of the less savory MLOs would engage in. Of course, the security of systems and controlling, paper and ensuring that paper is available for the regulators to see is still very important for us. And I have to echo the concerns about our examiners going into MLO's homes to do exams. I know personally I did an exam sitting at somebody's dining room table once while they were folding laundry. Wasn't the most comfortable exam I've ever done. And so we do have some concerns about the safety, which, would be alleviated if we weren't licensing home locations. The one other concern I really do have in a more remote environment is training. The remote environment's great when you have an MLO who's seasoned and they know the company's processes and they know the legal requirements that they have to do. I worry a little bit more about how well that's going to work in an environment that's, less restrictive when you have an MLO who's brand new, and how well they're going to learn the new requirements and ensure that they're following them, as well as learning the company's culture. So those are some of the things that I've been thinking about as we talk about loosening our branch requirements.
Okay, I'll add to that, Mr. Shonda, not anything new, really, but I can give my perspective on that. As a former IT examiner, my first thing on the list is security, infrastructure, validation, vulnerability testing, penetration testing. Those kind of things are concerning because it is it's privileged information, so I worry about just making sure that the systems are secure in that front. Safety is another point to consider with the examiners going on those locations. My last point is the basic principles of an examination, of a physical examination. You're right. You capture those nonverbal things that you may not see when you're doing a remote exam. I mean, we're talking about what we can take away from this process, this pandemic response and doing remote exams. We're definitely going to keep some of these things. We're going to keep all of it? Probably not at the state level from what we're doing on examinations. But I do think we can carry forward some of these things. And so what's lost, the value gained is great. The value lost is what I worry about with migrating and not having the ability to go in and see and feel. Do understand that the point on the digital platform versus the paper platform makes sense. But just sharing, you have regulators on the call, so you're going to get regulator perspective. So those are just my points of concern.
Thank you all.
Could I add to that? Could I just... So just things that I thought of is that, at least in a lot of states, there's nothing preventing me from licensing someone's home at the branch location. So that's something that currently you could license someone's home in, 15, 20 states. But it's the concept of, I think, the fact of, do you need to license every single person's home? And then if they're in a highly licensed a highly licensed loan officer, meaning they're in 15, 20 states, and then applying that many branch licenses to each of those LO homes. So if we weren't to go to the work from home, but say you kept the, branch licensing around, Kirsten, Rashonda, Charlie, I just think of the licensing teams at the states, right? We've got, I think, almost 2,800 loan officers. And if even each one is licensed in 10 states and licensing each of their homes in that many states, just the sheer volume and just the paperwork, but what is that necessarily gaining by it being a license versus a declaration that they're working from home, so you know that that's where they're at. So kind of another distinction to think about of, what does the license benefit versus knowing that they're there. And then being able to, on top of that, have still, from Rashonda, Lake, and Kirsten and Charlie, all your concerns that you have in regards to privacy, security, and all of that, that's still there, that's still mandated, but not necessarily having to go through the formality of a surety bond, of, the paperwork and everything else, but more or less a declaration that that's where this loan officer is working from.
To piggyback on that, we're arguing not that these homes become branches, but that the work is happening remotely from an actual commercial location that is licensed. So it would be, it's not a place to examine, but you should be able to set your thresholds high enough where you feel secure in the conversations that are happening. One suggestion would be, quality monitoring taking place just like it would happen in a commercial business center, or whatever else you think, whatever else is needed to feel secure about it. We get that.
Yeah, I think the key here is to make sure, and this is the perfect situation of getting the dialogue, understanding the concerns of the regulators, and also what the industry has capability as VPN, call monitoring, and things like that we can come to a level of understanding and both sides are comfortable making sure that we as the industry and the regulators know what is actually going on, whether it be someone working remotely out of their home or from a call center in the various iterations of the industries out there as far as how they have their business structured. So I think this and other future collaborations is what we need, because we're all in this together, and we can obtain information as far as the regulators and that their staff are also working remotely, so we can collaborate on best practices there as well.
Yeah, and I think, bad stuff can happen from remote work, but, those same things can also happen in the branch and vice versa. And I think it's really just a matter of, how do we work together to identify. I think the companies are already building controls for a lot of these things. And so the question then becomes, how do we work with you guys to help you sort of track, monitor, and examine for it in a way that everybody's comfortable with? And I appreciate the dialogue around all these issues, because I think we're finding, frankly, a lot more common ground than frankly I would have expected 6 months ago. So this is all great dialogue, and hopefully we can move this forward.
Thank you all. Just to speak from my perspective on it, and this is really leading us into a great discussion about branching, as you say. In Kansas, we require branch licenses for our mortgage and consumer lenders. There are other entities that are either registered with us or debt management companies and things of that nature that don't have an express licensing requirement in the statute. But even they have reached out to us, and going back to the guidance, we went ahead and really lumped them in to our guidance, because they really found comfort in us just opining that even though the statute doesn't say you can or cannot work remotely, we wanted to go ahead and bring them in and say, just so you know, this is allowed. This is how we're taking this. So I think that was well received. I know that it gets into a weird place of, are we overstepping as a regulator? That there's no mandate in the statute for a branch license or the fact that you can't work remotely, but now we're being really asked to opine on that. But I felt like, especially during this pandemic and with the uncertainty going around, that was the right thing to do. And moving forward, of course, there's the question of where we do require those branch licensing requirements in statute, where is the risk really lying? And I think that's what we're taking a look at now. And I think this is a good conversation to have. I think it's a good conversation to talk about risk in other areas outside of whether there's a physical location licensed or not. So if we can spend less time, and I do come from a licensing background. I started here as an examiner, and then went into licensing for a while, and then now I'm back in examination and enforcement. There's a lot of time spent licensing branch locations, and it's fee income for the state. It drives our department, but it definitely is time that could better be spent possibly analyzing certain areas where we see that risk, that greater risk, more than just, okay, here's the physical location. The law has said this for 30 years. I need to get a license here. I think it's a good time for us to look through and see, okay, where has the law not caught up to what's really going on today, and where Where should we be looking at some changes to be flexible and really recognize that work isn't done the same way it was 2 decades ago or 3 decades ago? So this is a great conversation, and I'd love to continue it. If anybody has anything from their submissions that we haven't covered, or would like to talk about any, whether you think branch licensing in any respect or registration should be reevaluated, please speak up.
Jim, I'd love to talk about either benefits or best practices, whichever you prefer.
Either. Go ahead.
I think some of the benefits of letting financial institutions choose whether to permit remote work. We mentioned the diversity of location and differently abled type of employees, but also there's a commercial real estate reality, which is twofold: reducing existing commercial real estate costs, but also not increasing existing commercial real estate costs to make room for new spacing requirements. Safety for employees, employee satisfaction, competing for the best employees, happy employees are equal happy customers on the other side. Having the identical customer experience with remote workspace, and having the identical oversight as has been raised by some of the regulators on this panel. And then I think best practices that we've identified are in-person customer interactions not be conducted at the remote location, as many people referred to. Sensitive customer information being protected consistent with the licensee's existing cybersecurity protocols for on-site operations. Employees utilizing virtual workspaces and VPNs where appropriate or where required. Risk-based monitoring and oversight processes being followed to the concern about making sure that someone is doing what they're supposed to be doing when you can't be sitting next to them. Not having physical records at the remote location, as we mentioned. Information regarding the specific activities conducted on telework being maintained and available to regulators upon request. Conversations about consumers being kept private, where remote employees will work in an environment conducive and appropriate to that privacy. It doesn't have to be locked in a basement, but not sitting at Starbucks and not being at a kitchen table with their kids around listening. Regulatory oversight exams being unhindered or unaffected or unchanged, and including fees, and quality monitoring taking place just like in the commercial business center. Those are the best practices we think or hope could get everyone on the same page to be able to allow all types of different consumer creditors to conduct remote work while still being overseen by state regulators.
Thanks, Danielle. Does anybody have any reactions or follow-up to those comments?
This is Shonda. I'll respond. I think the best practices, they sound reasonable. And one thing, I looked at all the submissions, and my thought was we're all on the same page. But consider me a slow reader, because I think there are some considerations as a regulator I'm taking outside the scope of you as an industry. And so I don't think that what those best practices are and mean are unreasonable. I don't. I do think that there is we have been remote. It has worked. Has it been a success? I think that there have been a lot of other factors that really I can't give an answer for that, at least for right now, because our complaint volume is down too. And we're wondering, why is the complaint volume so low? But there's a lot of other federal and even state level subsidies that are out there that may be really affecting what the response is going to be from consumers. So I think I'm not turning negative Nancy here, but I do think that there are other considerations as a regulator. It's kind of a wait and see. Might totally work, but I think that there is prudence and patience here, and just kind of thinking through it and processing and digesting and having this conversation, to get there. So I don't have anything negative to say about those best practices. I think that they make total common sense. I'm hesitant to call what we've done, even at the state level, a success just yet. I think that we have a lot of lessons coming our way, too.
That's a good point, Rashonda. We've also had discussions about things that our governor's done, things that the federal agencies have done, and the impact that's had has been very beneficial to consumers. But that has a lifespan, and that hasn't really gone through yet to when we start to unwind some of those protections, or when we get back into a payment plan after a forbearance or a credit extension or a refinance or anything of that nature, as well as the large impact of job loss and things like that are going to have. But hopefully by this time next year, it'll be a lot more clear. And, even if we go through another cycle or two of licensing, I think some of those answers should become more clear, hopefully, on what it is that we should be doing.
So just to kind of add to the urgency too of this conversation, not only in like the short term of when to extend it, but also because it influences ultimately the long term, is at least, for Loan Depot, we're kind of a hybrid. We have our 400 some odd branches, but then we also have call center locations. And so our headquarters is in Orange County, California. And so we're looking at plans of loan officers who want to come back into the office, right, because they like that environment better. And so we're looking at how we need to redo our floor plans to be able to accommodate the required OSHA of, like the 6 feet and the sanitizing and face masks and all of those things from an employment just protection perspective. But then I look at it because of that, it's that much more of a decrease in actual a number of employees that can now go into that location, right? Because I've had to take away cubicles. There's also concepts of, maybe an LO wants to come in, to your point, Kirsten, from a training perspective, come in a couple days a week, and then that individual goes home 2 days a week, and another person comes in the next 2 days, right? But they're situated near their manager, but we got to keep the 6 feet, but we also want them to be able to interact. And so those conversations are happening right now of what we need to do because, as a company, we've more or less said we're home through the end of the year from a corporate company protection, right, of our customers and our employees. But then the changing, extensions by different states of when to go back home. But then ultimately, too, that if a loan officer is licensed in 15 states and 2 states say you have to go back into the office, the others say you can only, you can work from home. But then also Orange County, the cases are going up. And so then schools are back to distance learning. But then also taking into effect that if I decide like now everyone can go back in and I respace everything, because right now I can do it, but in the future, all of a sudden now I do have to have everyone back in. It all is culminating on itself. So as much as like the future of branch licensing, I think I think some people think, okay, that's the second conversation, like that's 2021. I actually think that's our conversation right now, because things that we're changing at companies right now affect our ability to sustain what the current rules are on the books, right, for all of our states. And so that balancing act, I'm seeing it every day get more and more urgent on the industry side.
Thank you all for your involvement and your participation. It's been a great conversation. I look forward to continuing it. I appreciate everyone's attention, and I'm looking forward to opening up discussion around some of the questions that have come in during the video to the chat. So let me look here and get a few questions to get some conversation started. We have a question that came in from Bob Nemi. Bob agrees that the last 5 months have shown us how effectively working remotely can be. He hopes that the requirements for the mortgage industry can be aligned and modernized and understand that today's mortgage is fintech in the way that is delivered to the consumer, and how and where they decide to make those loans. So I'll just open that up to the panel. Do you have any reactions or comments regarding the way mortgages are delivered today and how you think things should change or where they should stay the same?
I'll jump in here, I guess. I think Bob's right. I mean, I think mortgage is one of the last industries to really evolve in this space. You think back of what banking was like. When I opened my first bank account, you would walk in, you'd have a passbook savings account, you'd transact at the teller window. Today, you take a picture of the check. The check never ever even goes to the bank. Take a picture of the check on your phone, you submit it, it gets deposited. So I think we have to get to that same sort of place here in the mortgage space. There's no reason we can't accelerate the fully digital mortgage experience. And I think this is a great starting conversation to get there. I think we're seeing some of the other federal agencies move in this space to accept fully digital collateral. That is another, I think, important piece of this, that it's hard to be partially digital and partially paper-based. And so the more the agencies move into the digital space, the more people can turn everything into the digital mode. So I think this is a great discussion to kick us off.
What do others think?
So, Jim, I'll jump in. Hello, everyone. I would just kind of repeat my thoughts on it that I had on the recording, and that's that to the extent it's truly digital, and individuals aren't handling paper. I think regulators have much more comfort with kind of backing off of the branch license requirements. And so I think, this has been a great discussion. I do think that you're going to see progress in states kind of adjusting how they're approaching, especially home branch licensing. And I think, this is a good start. I know Jim mentioned Kansas. In Washington, we're looking at making legislative changes. And I think you'll see that around the country.
I agree with Charlie. I think that it would be nice if we start this conversation here and then we continue it by talking about what we can do to do this in sort of a seamless way that is cohesive and comprehensive, so you don't end up with 50 different systems where if you meet these standards in Washington, you can do it, but you have to meet different standards in Oregon. I think that is what industry is going to find the most useful. And I think that really is going to require a lot of conversation and, unfortunately, some time, to get 50 states to a point where we can say, okay, these standards make us comfortable, and then potentially have to make legislative changes to be able to implement those standards. You are looking at time. It's not going to happen immediately, but the conversation starting now and the experiences that we can draw on in dealing with COVID and watching people work from home and seeing what effect it has or doesn't have on complaints and examinations is really the sort of data that not only starts to make regulators feel comfortable, but makes it easy for us to go to legislators and say, we don't perceive that there's a higher risk to consumers if we, allow industry to move into a more modern time and recognize that consumers' needs are changing and allow them to meet them in a digital manner and also from, workplaces that allow them to be competitive in the industry.
This is Shonda. I'll add a little bit to that. I think one thing the pandemic has given us is prompted a change in mindset. I think we have a universal conversation on both the bank and non-bank side. There is a distinct change coming for the business model, for mortgage and for banking. So I think this is a critical time for receptiveness in having that conversation. I do think there is a level of comfort that both the industry and the states have to have a productive conversation. So I definitely think that this is a good start. I think that there's a lot to be gained from a change. Change is not all bad. So I do think that this is a really good start. Again, I think that unfortunately there will be some time involved in getting it to the destined location, but I do think we're on the same page.
Yes, I definitely agree. It's a good time this is a great forum to have a discussion, and moving it forward is the entire goal here. And all of the conversation is good, and I appreciate everyone's additions, and as we move forward, we're going to need that more than ever to make sure that we do the right thing. So let's go on to the next question. See. So Bob Nemi brought up another point with his, so we'll go right into that one real quick. The need for branch licensing has evolved. And, the need for it to evolve was brought up during the August 2019 this meeting at Armour last year, and there was a mention of a regulator committee or a working group to review the issue. We also had a panel dedicated to this topic at the 2020 NMLS conference. So what do our regulator and industry panelists think of this? Should more attention be given to the specific topic, and would a working group or a committee help?
This is Danielle from ASSA. We would love to see, the regulators join together discussing this and having the industry as involved as possible and appropriate. We'd also love to remind everybody that it's more than just the mortgage industry, and that there are some, and I think it's important, the reason I keep harping on that, because we represent the mortgage industry too, is that I think that we have to look at each business model and what contexts are really the most outdated. And I think that all of our member industries have a lot of reasons why we should be able to work from home and reach the standards that the regulators need in order to feel comfortable with what we're doing.
Jim, I would add that the situation that we're going through now reminds me of where we had to pull industry and regulators together back when we were developing the NMLS. We were coming together for a common goal then, and what resulted was a great system that we all utilize now to manage our licenses across the board, and more than just the mortgage industry as well, as Danielle was mentioning. But going back to what Kristen said about having a cohesive approach, that's where I think a working group and a combined approach is a must. And hopefully, in that time we can get that working group, or however it may form, together, that the state will continue to issue guidance as they may, or non-action letters, as Charlie Clark had mentioned, depending on their requirements in their state, so that the industry can move forward with some level of comfort, at least into 2021, because, who knows what the fall is going to bring as far as the regular flu and the virus, and, going into 2021 through the winter and the summer and spring of next year. There's just a lot of unknowns at this point, and having some stability, at least on the industry side, with an understanding with our regulators would go a long way.
I'd echo Danielle and Charlie both that this is a good remote work is a kickstart for perhaps a more holistic look at branch licensing and other modernization opportunities going forward.
I am fully supportive of collaboration, and I think work groups are fantastic. But I also think time's of the essence a little bit here. And I think we've already kind of created some common denominators with what an acceptable law or guidance would look like. I mean, keep your data safe, manage physical records so that the regulators have some comfort level, and put some parameters around where you're meeting with customers. I can tell you I'm already pretty comfortable with allowing some exception under those parameters. I think a lot of other regulators are also okay with that. So I think some progress could absolutely be made in the short term. I'm open to working groups and trying to create that uniformity, but I don't want creating a work group to be at the expense of making some progress in this area.
Definitely. And I think the guidance currently that has been really tested at the state level serves as that initiative going forward. Like you said, where we can find harmony, it's really right there, and it's public, and many states have issued it, which has been very helpful for both other regulators as well as the industry to kind of come to a common approach, especially in such a short amount of time, relatively speaking, to really address this the pandemic for one, but also look towards the future to see where we can move so that we're not stuck in this position again, having to scramble and come up with things to make it the best of our ability, make it work.
So, Jen, this is Melissa, and I think everyone who's been, listened to our pre-recorded conversation, the conversation today, is that I think we all want to move towards the next phase, right? And I hear, whether it's, different flavors of what that looks like, but we're all kind of, at least this group, ready to embrace, okay, let's talk about the immediate need in regards to COVID, but then also almost the right immediate after that, which is the long-term kind of catching up to what our basically our culture is starting to formulate into right now. As we talk, LOs are wanting to move, right? They're wanting to get into more affordable housing. They're wanting to, live closer to other family members. And so I'm excited to get that conversation going. To your point, Charlie and Jim, and I'm sure Rashenda and Kirsten also agree, as to how do we start that process? How do we engage the regulators? I know that the MBA submitted their letter, and Danielle with yours also, and we're really wanting to engage in that conversation and see how we can assist the industry, the trade associations, and to be able to start moving forward and making the change. So I would be interested to know, what is our next step? I think we're all let's go. So what does that path look like?
Sure. Absolutely. And that kind of brings up a comment that was made by a fellow regulator. The regulators have their job to do to enforce the law. We've been given the directive by the legislature to do what it says and to regulate the industry. And so we're also looking for we want to go forward in the right way. There's only so much room you can move within what's in the statute. You can make regulations and suggest that, but again, they're also overseen and approved in a public process by our legislature. So the regulator that had mentioned the trade associations really do need to get engaged with those state legislatures and with lawmakers directly in the process, and but also with the regulators to preview language or look at a common model law or something to that effect that we can really understand and say, this has worked in the past, or this is gaining steam in other states. That's really what is needed, I think, to get something to move fairly rapidly, other than just piecemeal over a 5 or 10 year period. Is really going to need to we're going to need to have people engaged at the local level to get this movement underway. And so we also had comments from Kobe Pruitt with the NBA asking, for us to kind of discuss, what does that look like? So what does it look like to have a trade association involved? What needs to be done? And like I said, I've had nothing but support from our commissioner here in Kansas. We're really trying to meet this pandemic. We're trying to meet the needs of the industry and the consumers that we're serving. And we are trying to move forward in the best way possible. But we're just one state, and we know other people are in our same boat. And there's a lot going on, obviously, that we're trying to address. So the more that we can have, like I said, a model law or a model policy to suggest or draft to the legislatures, the better. So what does everybody think about those topics, those comments?
To Kobe's point.
I definitely think.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Danielle.
Well, to Kobe's point, I think that we've looked at all 50 states and what the statutes are for all of our members, and there are just some things that are unanswered, and we try to customize all of our outreach to regulators to point those out. But there'll be things that say something in a state statute, something along the lines of, if you're in the business of making a consumer loan, you must be licensed or you must have a license. And so the question is, are individuals within companies in the business of making a consumer loan, or is the creditor itself in the business? And is making a collection call, does that make you a collector, and do you have to get a collections license? Can collectors work from home as long as everything's private and all of the standards are met for best practices? There are a lot of little antiquated things in each state, of course, in their statutes, but sometimes I think that that some of these laws are so old they don't even contemplate, even though you can be licensed in those states now, the idea of what is required is sort of fitting a square peg in a round hole. Maybe this is good to just bring some of that to light anyway.
Jim, it's Pete. I think, the idea around a common framework or a model is really important. I look at what the work we did together with CSBS and the regulators on the uniform state test, where, there were a dozen, maybe 15 initial adopters, but industry worked with our state associations and worked with each in each individual state to really build that wave. And in a fairly short period of time, we were able to get all 50 states on board with the uniform state test. So I do think there is a role for sort of working together to develop the model framework, and then MBA and AFSA and some of the other trades working together with our state associations to really drive the process. Because every state's going to be different. Sometimes it's legislation, sometimes it's rules, sometimes it's executive orders, different ways to go. Each state's different. We got to find the critical mass in each state to advocate for those changes, however it needs to get done.
Well, and I hate to be the Debbie Downer of the group, but the one thing that is going to hold some states back is the effect of what this will do on our budget. Because if I start cutting out a bunch of branches I used to license, my licensing revenue comes down, and I've got to replace that revenue. So having a model law or a model, some sort of model that we can draw on, that we say, oh, this is what people are, saying is an appropriate level, and we can all kind of agree that this is what the standard should look like, allows us to go in and do a better job of analyzing what revenue we're going to lose if we adopt that, and look for ways to replace that revenue so that we can help modernize things without having a cut that we can't sustain.
That's a great point, Kirsten. And we in Kansas have also been battling the same issue. As I mentioned, we're trying to come up with guidance that can be permanent for an MLO to work remotely. And we understand that if we're removing the requirement that they reside in a commutable distance from a licensed location may impact our revenue on each branch fee. However, some changes made years ago allowed us to charge fees on a volume level, to charge a fee based on how many loans were produced within our state with a minimum amount. So our plan was to use that authority that was granted by our legislature to really match the volume that we're seeing, which doesn't change as much as how many branches applications are coming through. I understand that that's likely a hurdle depending on each state and so forth, but there's definitely several states I've noticed throughout the years that have gone. We weren't the first by any means, but several have moved towards a volume type fee approach, which is similar to how the fees are charged on the banking division in our state, based on assets held under the institutions. So hopefully something like that could help. And we also have a few fees set by regulation, and we're considering modestly increasing the mortgage loan originator fee to kind of counterbalance that loss of branch revenue. So that in this case, it does deal directly with mortgage loan originators working at their residence. So we thought about upping that fee and reduce it to counteract the branch fees, application fees, and renewal fees going away.
This is Shonda. I'll share a little bit of my thoughts on that. I do think starting with a model framework is a great concept and idea. I think that because each state has their own challenges, I mean, the budgetary pieces were mentioned just now, and how that licensing framework will work as far as fees. But I do think one thing to consider is the temperament of each legislative body in each state, because I think that plays a huge role in how productive this effort is. Because I have introduced legislation, we have as an agency, and it gets changed. Once a law is open, there are modifications made to that. So while we may start with point A, we might end up at point DD. I don't know, but I just do know that there is subject to the temperament and the tolerance of the legislative body. And I think we can retain some integrity in where we started to get some of the things we want. But I do think that, at least from my state's perspective, that may be one of our bigger challenges in what Representative or Senator might understand or want to see in something like that. So that's just something that we also have as a challenge looking forward in this act.
So I just have a follow-up before we move on. It's this great discussion on this issue. I would like to think that the states can, as a group, come together with the challenges mentioned that, like Pete said, a critical mass, at least moving in the same direction, so that even if there are challenges that need to be worked through, that over time, maybe we move in that general direction. And I think that's probably how things will go. Obviously with the SAFE Act was a federal mandate, and it changed things overnight. And that's not the case here, and nor should it be. I think this is state regulation, and we're regulating and for the consumers that are living there and using those services. But I would hope that over time we can keep these conversations going and move in a direction, a similar direction together as a group, especially as we're using the NMLS, and that states are changing supervision to modernize things and streamline things and look at things more the same versus more differently, and as much as possible, given the products and the state regulations and rules and all the things of that nature. So I do think that we're making progress, like I said, and I'm looking forward to more of that. Let's go to another question here. David Shirk with Lockstein Legal. He asked, do any of the states feel that there are NMLS changes that would be necessary to make work from home practices permanent? So to the regulators, do you feel that there are changes that would need to be made to the system to make this work from home? Is there any hurdle there?
There has been some discussion of, being able to track when things go wrong. So, but we have certain information. So it's kind of gone back and forth about whether the system already captures enough information. So let's say you get a rogue MLO and they start doing bad things, and we hear from consumers about, them taking money and things like that. We know where their home is because their residence is listed in NMLS. So even if they weren't working at a commercial office or a licensed location, we're going to guess they're working at their home. That's one of the places where we've been talking about the limitations is, basically
Kirsten, your audio just cut out. Are you hearing me? Sorry, maybe within like 20 seconds it just stopped. While she's fixing that, does anybody else have any comments on that? NMLS changes, should we make any, are there any hurdles with the way the system functions now that prohibit where we're trying to go?
This is Shonda. We have not identified any hurdles just yet, but again, this is a beginning of a conversation, but I'm sure that will come up at some point, but I have not identified anything yet.
That's really where Washington's at, and if we do identify issues, we'll try and provide clear guidance, as needed on our end, on the state end, and work with NMLS to make everything go smoothly. That's our objective. If our agency request legislation gets through.
So this is Kirsten. I think I'm back on. Sorry about that.
Yes, you are. We can hear you.
The one place where we looked at NMLS and have some question about this is just if it's a location other than the MLS home. So if they're working remotely and that's not a licensed location, but it's not their home, and there have been times where we've had to work with the criminal authorities to execute search warrants and those sorts of things. It gets hard if it isn't one of those two places. And we know those two places are in NMLS, so we're not worried about that. It's more of does that mean whatever rules get written have to say you can only work at a place that's in NMLS? So you either get it licensed or you work at your home, which doesn't seem quite the best. So that's the one place where we've kind of looked at it and said, in past cases, this might have been an impediment to us investigating a bad behavior by a bad actor.
That makes sense. Yeah, and just from my perspective, just to add, I think, the system is the system. Sometimes it functions the way you expect, and sometimes it's just you click this box to move to the next page because that's the way it was fundamentally set up. So I definitely agree that we can move forward in whatever way we need to move forward to, as Charlie said, really reflects the state law. I mean, this is if it's the state system to work with compliance matters and in licensing things. So the system should function in a way that will allow us to regulate the way the state law reads. So I can't think of specifics other than, maybe just more flexibility in the system to reflect to a regulator, this is where this person's working, or this person is primarily remote versus we just have a license. Just more transparency, maybe a little bit more data in there would allow more flexibility in regulation and less questions at the regulator level. And whether that's just a location that they're working remotely from or working at that's not licensed, because now the state laws changed, but the system can still reflect, where a person's working, even if branch license or branch registration, ceases to be. All right, let's see. David Shirk, again, Lost Sign Legal, also went on and said he noted that this issue that we're discussing isn't related solely to the COVID-19 pandemic. Other issues may arise and do that might require an employee in any industry to work remotely. And for instance, he gave an example that there's been a wildfire emergency evacuation notice for residents in his county, just 15 miles away from where he is. So, and then technically under some state laws, a disaster recovery location would need to have a license before a company could resume operations and customer support. And so are there any reactions to that statement, those comments?
I saw David's comment in the chat box, and I think it's a good point, and I think it sort of underscores the need for all of us to get together and hash out some of these contingencies that we're thinking about it in the COVID context. There are other contexts where remote work might be important, and I think if we're working together, we can help spot those and address them more holistically.
I completely agree, because I know we've received calls about people displaced by hurricanes, flooding, tornadoes, all kinds of natural disasters. Much like the commenter, I have staff who are, packing up for evacuations, and it's affecting us as the regulator, so we know it's affecting licensees. And the reality is that happens all the time, and it would be nice to have a system that works not only for the pandemic, although please let this be the last one in my lifetime, but also for the more realistic things that we see on a regular basis, because unfortunately natural disasters are a regular basis in the United States.
I completely agree with Kirsten. We were entertaining this, a year and a half ago, because I think, and I'm speaking for, the state of Washington, there's some appeal here. We're known in Washington as kind of a tech hub, and in many other industries, folks are able to work remotely. Folks have expressed concern about that to me over the years, and for those reasons, this doesn't seem like a tough place for us to go with certain consumer protections built around whatever we decide.
So Mississippi, prior to the pandemic, this was not a conversation we were having. Remote work, it wasn't something that was a part of our initiatives, part of our strategic plan, part of our vision. It is a part of our discussion now. However, we have not made immediate plans to pursue any legislative changes for the next session just yet. We do a lot of talking, testing, discussing, and that's kind of where we are. So I think that every agency is going to have to get to a place of comfort. I do think that this place starts around a conversation like this. I think it might look different down the road for some agencies, but we're just not there yet. We are having conversations, but a more realistic conversation now than we had, 6, 8, 10 months ago.
That's a good point, Rashonda. And we also in Kansas, as with other states, we have learned over the years, as do all that work with the legislatures, really the best way to interact and the best way to educate and to bring that cohesive. We really need to vet those issues like we are now before it gets to the legislative level, and so that they can have some comfort in where we're heading, especially if there's successes in other states that we can point to, would be really helpful, or successes in an order that alleviated the need for, let's say, a branch, or an order that required, something to change due to COVID. We can maybe learn from that. So it's definitely a challenge, though. I respect that fully, and the more time I've spent here dealing with our own legislators and committees, and it is tough. It's tough to educate. It's tough to get things changed sometimes, but it's definitely worth the effort, and we do need to work together as much as we can, and share ideas and share conversations, share hurdles with each other, so that we can get to a better place. I do want to bring up a comment that's from somebody that is in the auto industry. We are talking a lot about mortgage, but this obviously affects other industries as well, as Danielle can attest. And so what are states doing that are in either auto finance or debt collection industries, but specifically this commenter asked about auto finance. There's not usually branch locations, but there's a headquarters or call center locations where employees work. How have states addressed those?
Well, this is Kirsten. We don't specifically have an auto finance. We have a consumer finance license that is to finance non-retail contract loans secured by automobiles. And when we first issued our guidance, we looked at all of the programs that we have on NMLS and identified that there were two of them where we have specific things that would normally be interpreted to say you had to work at a licensed location. And so we issued guidance to say that during this, any loan originators, regardless of type of loans that they're originating, could do so from, a remote location. We would not be taking enforcement action. Our other programs that were on NMLS, so like our collection agency laws, our money transmitter laws, we did not see anything there that specifically required people to work from a specific location. And so we noted to them that we didn't think that there was any reason why they needed a specific guidance to do that, but that we would ask that they take the same things into consideration that we were asking for with the loan originators. So what's the security level of the private personal information of the consumers that you're dealing with, not having them come to an MLS or one of your staff members' homes to engage in the business. All those same sorts of concerns that we had, if they could address them, even though we didn't feel like there was a statutory thing that said they had to be working at a licensed location.
Jim, I would just add that as we may have other state regulators, and I'm eager to hear their viewpoints, as we go through this process, there could be as far as declarations and whatnot. I know several states, that is what triggers their ability to issue guidance. I would just like to hear from some of the state regulators as it relates to, say that you have a large industry player, whether it be a auto industry or mortgage or consumer finance, where there is a call center environment and there are locations, say, in 2 or 3 states where the actual locations may be in pandemic concerned areas, so to speak. But the state in which the licensed individual may hold a license in those other states but not be physically located, nor the company have a presence there. I just hope the state regulators, take that into consideration as they may look to extend or modify their work from home guidance in the months ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, just to emphasize something that Charlie's saying, we would love to know, just so we know where we stand once and for all, if someone is purchasing retail installment sales contracts, whether it be vehicle or different types of installment sales contracts, or if somebody is collecting in their own name or as a DBA and they're licensed, does the license cover all these activities? And if they're in a central location that's outside that state, can they work from home as long as they're doing what we think about the 6 to 8 best practices? So we just don't know the answer to that in a lot of places. And it's because in various states, and I know each regulator on the call has their own state structure. In some states, all kinds of licensees are lumped together, even though their business models are really different.
Yeah, that is a good point. And I will just kind of reiterate from the recording earlier, Kansas decided to lump in other industries because we were getting those questions about whether they can work remotely. And in our state, I know they're all different. We do require, it's really a filing. It's more akin to a registration for auto finance for both the dealership that's generating the retail installment contract and the assignee that's taking it. The dealerships are never located outside of Kansas, but the assignees are. And so the assignee then is covered in our guidance that says that you can work remotely, for any time that you need. But, really there is no requirement in the law that they couldn't have worked remotely already. The only requirement is that they just let us know, where is your headquarters? And should we ever do an examination there, we might have gone there physically, or we'd at least send them a letter and say, this is what we need from you, and we would understand where the records were retained and things like that. But like I said, and I would encourage other states to do the same if you can, is just to really come out and say either I've heard the term no action letter several times, or just in the guidance that says, this is not spoken to in the law. It doesn't say that you can or can't work remotely, but right now remote work is allowed. And we're also considering more of a permanent guidance on the non-mortgage front as well, just to reiterate for folks, just to be helpful and let them know, remote work, because if this keeps going on for, who knows how long, then they'll at least understand that they're not doing anything wrong by letting somebody work from home as long as the headquarters, they filed that with our office. So no, that's a very good point, and I hope states take that into consideration as much as possible. Broaden that guidance to reflect as many industry participants as they can. I think now is a good time to wrap things up. I did want to end with a very positive comment that we received in the chat, and from Ms. Keisha Whitehall-Wolf to all the panelists. Kudos to all of you for this beautiful reminder that the regulator-industry relationship is not always fraught with peril. Sometimes just being open to the dialogue can lead to amazing developments. That said, special thanks to Charlie Clark and his team for not only taking the time to listen to the concerns, but for swiftly taking action to be on the forefront of these issues. So thank you all. Thank you, Keisha, for your comment. And thank you, everyone, for your comments and chats. We've taken them all into consideration. Please continue to send items, conversation, questions to the Ombudsman inbox. It's ombudsman@nmls.org. Again, ombudsman@nmls.org.